Welcome back to Raising Men. I'm your host, Shaun Dawson. Now, if you're new to the show, normally we sit down for long-form conversations with authors or psychologists or, even just dads who are in the trenches, who are all trying to get to the bottom of the question about how we raise excellent sons. Sons that have purpose, that are strong, that are that have heart. But today we are going to open up the listener mailbag for a Q&A episode. We're going to address two specific situations from dads who are dealing with some heavy transitions and some cultural noise. Now, one of the real lessons that I've had in doing this project is that our sons are not just watching us. They are becoming us, or they're becoming the opposite of us, right? They learn by our example, and they learn by our counterexample. And sometimes they're getting the example is the one we want them to give, and sometimes it's not. And sometimes the counterexample is the one that we want them to, they're working against what they see from us, and that's a good thing because we don't want them to take on our baggage. But sometimes it's the opposite of that too. Today we're going to look at what it takes to guide a 13-year-old boy through a modern rite of passage, and how to handle a teenager who's getting pulled into some of the more dark corners of online performative masculinity. We're going to, as always, in episodes like this, we're going to lean on the collective wisdom of our past guests to try to give you some actionable insights. Like I said, like I keep saying, I'm not really an expert here. But from this platform, I've been able to talk to a lot of people who are. So let's jump straight into the first question. Our first question comes from a listener who's looking at his 13-year-old son and realizes the clock is ticking a little bit. He says, I want to start a rite of passage for my 13-year-old. What are the key principles for a modern initiation? Now, first of all, I just want to point out that it's great that you're thinking about this intentionally. I talk a lot about how the institutions that used to provide this sort of thing for us are crumbling or gone. And so we have to step into the breach there and provide it. And, I also talk about how that is both a problem and an opportunity. It's a problem in the sense that it's not going to happen by default, but it's an opportunity in the sense that we can customize it to our own values. A lot of fathers, I think, myself included, maybe let this threshold pass on autopilot. We're busy. We have a lot going on. We have careers and relationships to maintain and all of that. But essentially, that's just expecting your boy to magically become a man. And a boy doesn't become a man just because he turns a certain age or goes through puberty. Those things help. But he becomes a man because there's a community of healthy, mature men that intentionally welcomes him into their ranks. So there's an episode with former Navy SEAL master sniper instructor Eric Davis during episode 24. Eric has a book called Raising Men, which is one of the inspirations for the show. And it's called Raising Men, Lessons Navy SEALs Learned from Their Training and Taught to Their Sons. And he argues that traditional masculinity hasn't failed because it is inherently broken. It's failing because the modern environment has changed so radically and our parenting models haven't updated to match it. So one principle he talked about to build your initiation around is what Eric calls training them to have a bias towards action. So he talked about how in SEAL training and in life, resilience is not a static personality trait that you either have or you don't have. Resilience is a skill, and it is a functional skill trained by maintaining and restoring your ability to act under stress. And eventually, if you get good enough at it, it's to act under immense stress. And as modern boys are basically drowning in a digital world that rewards total passivity. They watch other people live instead of living themselves potentially. So your rite of passage cannot just be a symbolic ceremony or a nice dinner where you give him some, like a watch or something. It needs to be something active, an outdoor adventure or a physical challenge designed around serious responsibility. And it doesn't necessarily have to be one big thing. You don't want to set them up to fail, right? Like if you've been sitting around watching YouTube for the past 3 years, okay, we're going to do this rite of passage. We're going to go into the woods and you're going to have to kill a boar, right? To take an extreme example. That's not going to work, right? You're going to set them up to fail. And the rite of passage he should be able to succeed. It should be, and if he's not in a position to succeed, well, then that's part of the journey as well. Eric Davis talked about how when he wants to teach his sons responsibility, he doesn't lecture them. He takes them into the mountains or he puts them in the ocean and he puts them in charge of navigation, of the safety gear, of the food supplies. And then he takes a step back. And if they make a mistake, they're going to experience the real world consequences of that mistake in real time. So he creates a situation where they can make mistakes, but they can make the mistakes in a way that isn't fatal or doesn't cause permanent damage. And then, and if something is about to happen that would cause permanent damage, he steps in. So, if they forget a piece of equipment, they're going to be cold or they're going to go hungry. And that's not cruel. It's about it's about introducing intentional discomfort within a safe framework. I hope that helps. I hope that gives you some guidelines in kind of creating and cultivating rites of passage. Let's turn to our second question, which I think touches on kind of a massive anxiety about running through our community. Father writes, my son is watching Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson, and I'm worried that he's getting toxic ideas. How do I counter this black pill masculinity? So first off, thank you for your honesty. I think it's, kind of easy to panic when you walk past your son's bedroom and you hear these specific voices. Maybe you're familiar with them, maybe you're not, maybe you love them, maybe you hate them, all sorts of things, but I think it can be easy to get alarmed potentially, whatever the voices they're hearing. And there's this kind of black pill narrative that is a hyper cynical algorithmic belief that the world is entirely rigged against young men and that the only solution is cold dominance, financial hoarding, a view of relationships as a zero-sum war. And that is a drug, and it's a really potent drug, and it's a grift. And the people who are doing that are getting rich by keeping your son locked in the basement. And it doesn't seem like it is. A lot of what they have to say is really, really good. The gateway drug is really, really good. I mean, how do you argue with make your bed? How do you argue with clean your room, right? And those are the things. I mean, I really have a lot of admiration for some of what Jordan Peterson does in that respect, teaching kids responsibility and all of that. But it then becomes packaged in stuff that I think is really unhealthy. And I think it's really important, actually, for your boys to get exposure to this stuff. By the way, there's a whole opposite side of this coin that's just as bad, which is this notion that masculinity is evil, is to be avoided, that boys and men have had their time. And, that the kind of black pill movement is a reaction and a response to that, I think. And I don't know. Actually, as I'm thinking it through, it's a feedback cycle. It's a vicious cycle where one of those things provokes the other thing and makes it worse. And so the more, hyper woke men are evil stuff that's out there, that gives fuel to the black pilled. See, the culture is trying to put us down, and so we need to violently react against it stuff. And it's just not healthy. What it does is it creates an us versus them mentality. And that's the way that bad actors hijack us and get us pitted against each other And, it's the difference between trying to break a bundle of sticks and trying to break an individual sticks. We will all hang together, or we will surely all hang separately, as the Revolutionary War kicked off, right? I think the important thing is to look closely at why our boys are consuming what they're consuming. Nobody is turning to online gurus because they want to be evil, right? They're turning to them because they're navigating an identity crisis. They're trying to figure out who they want to be. And that is a healthy thing. It's a good thing for them to do. The problem is that we've created a situation where the algorithms are the only spaces telling them that their masculine energy is valuable. Dan Doty, who's a pioneer in men's leadership and wellness therapy, broke this down in one of our episodes. Dan explained that our culture has effectively clear-cut the traditional forests of modern masculinity. So we've dismantled the civic, spiritual, and community institutions that used to guide boys into manhood for us. And that has left a massive male vacuum. Parents end up getting forced to choose between that rigid, aggressive archetypes celebrated online or in film and video and books and stuff, or this empty alternative of no masculinity at all, right? And so Dan Doty referenced some data where he said that roughly 40% of young men now report having absolutely nobody to turn to for personal guidance. Man, think about that, right? And, those people are nobody to turn to for personal guidance. That might not even be true, but that's the experience that these boys have. So if your son is trapped in this basement scrolling through, feeds that you don't think are good for him, your default instinct might be to come in as an authoritarian enforcer. Just shut it down, right? We're going to block these websites, or we're going to block these YouTube sites and stuff like that. Now, and that is probably counterproductive. It is important to give your boy the proper critical thinking skills necessary to be able to encounter this kind of content and filter out what is useful and discard what is not useful. As we've learned from our guests, that kind of authoritarian technique backfires completely. It just introduces another aggressive barbarian into the room. It's going to trigger his defensive armoring. It's going to prove to him that the world really is as hostile as the guys in the YouTube videos claim. So what do? You need to offer a more compelling and high-definition version of masculinity inside your own house. You don't argue with the screen. You compete with it. And the nice thing about it is you have the advantage. You can sit down with your son. You can ask him, kind of reporter questions, curiosity. Be curious about it. Ask him, use the template that we've talked about in our episodes. What about this video resonated with you? What do you think the guy gets right about how hard it is to be a young man today? What do you think might be wrong? How would you test these propositions out in the real world? And if you listen without immediately issuing a verdict, which is hard to do, you're going to lower that drawbridge. You're going to gain this kind of relational equity. You're treating him like a fully functional thinking person. And you can then point out what's good and what's a grift. You can say to him, look, I see your drive. I see your competitiveness. I see your desire to be a protector and a leader. Those are phenomenal strengths. But beware that these online figures are running kind of a financial hustle, and they're designed to profit off of isolation. And so a lot of what will end up happening here is it's empty calories. It feels good, but it actually doesn't help. You want to give his masculine energy a purposeful and physical outlet, productive outlet. You take him outside, build something together, get him involved in real work, hard work. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be physical work. It can be intellectual work, but show him that an excellent man doesn't hide behind an online persona. He's there physically. He shows up. He takes ownership of his thoughts, ownership of his outcomes. And he uses strength to serve his family and his community. as opposed to making things worse, which is the way a lot of these kind of black-pilled figures end up putting things. I was, we got to burn it all down. Well, burning it all down is making things worse. And, the thought is, we'll replace it with something better. Yeah, maybe you will. But the world doesn't have a whole lot of examples where that's been the case. And it certainly hasn't ever been the case without it being really, really intentional of exactly what you're going to replace it with, an exact, really positive vision of what you want to do. Because I get having the destructive reflex, but it's not being destructive for destruction's sake is only letting the bad guys win. It's okay to tear something down if what you plan to replace it with is much better, but you better think that through. That's going to bring us to the close, this Q&A session. But one of the things that occurs to me here is that you don't need to have every clean answer figured out right now, today. You just have to be willing to stay with the room and sit in the discomfort, face what you'd rather avoid, and do the hard internal work and do it in front of your boy. That is the lesson. Your boy doesn't need you to be the expert. He needs you to show him how to thrive. And part of that is modeling the struggle. And they're learning how to handle fear and power and connection by watching what you do. So until next time, keep up the work. Stay curious about your own experience so that you can lead his experience. And remember that they're watching everything you do, man. And that is a privilege and it is a huge responsibility. My name is Shaun Dawson, and this is Raising Men, and you are a great parent.